before we start, I want to say after reading the Peter Singer paper on bestiality, I decided after reading that I had to write my paper about ethics of sex. And so I hope that's okay because I've already written like 600 words.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I guess we should start with Peter Singer then. What are your thoughts on, let me tell you a brief personal story. I was walking through the New Orleans airport many, many years ago, and I see a magazine cover and it says philosopher defends bestiality. And I'm like, that's gotta be Peter Singer. That's gotta be Peter Singer. And it was. So then, and then I found this article, this is like the article, I guess, that they were talking about. I was surprised by one of the things they did the statistic. He said that in the rural areas, it said 50% of people report having some sort of like sexual interaction with, I guess, the farm animals.
Yeah.
That blew me away.
Really? I heard this thing that like, what was people just like they were previously Amish and they were saying it was gross, but they were saying, you guys have I had no idea how many Amish guys like genuinely have sex with their animals. And they were all like, ooh, that's gross. But especially in like super religious areas, you know.
So I don't want to, in my view, I think I don't want to kink shame. You do you, like if it doesn't hurt the animal, often as Singer points out, the animal is interested in the activity. I don't know, like I can't imagine that if there were anything you could say against it, you could go down the route of saying some sort of consent rape issue with the animal. So that's one way to explore. Another way to explore is you could try saying there's something wrong about you and your attitude towards sex, but I can't imagine if masturbation is fine, if sex toys are fine, then like as long as there's not a consent issue on the part of the animal, it's just a homegrown sex toy.
I saw another article. I was looking for other articles. I only found one other article, and it was actually kind of a response to Peter Singer, but he agreed with him. It was actually, I don't remember his last Neil Levy, the same guy who wrote one of the Gamer's Dilemma papers.
Yeah.
And he was like basically agreed with Singer or whatever, but he started out by saying like Singer seems to really like controversy. But like as far as it goes, I feel that like with the consent thing, right? My concern here is clearly like an animal can consent to have sex with another animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the question is, how is that different with humans?
I guess you could say since we're, and then you'd have to agree that humans are higher than animals, but we genuinely think that we have a higher, order consciousness, and we have a couple qualities that we're higher than. It would be like saying, I think a defense you could make is it's wrong to have sex with children is the same reason it's wrong to have sex with animals. Not that children can consent to sex, but in the same way that they're not as capable of the cognitive functions that you as an adult human are. That would be the only one I could think of, but
yeah, I was.
It still just kind of strikes you as weird, sort of thing. But that's not.
But a child's going to grow up to be. I feel like a child can be psychologically harmed by it. They will become their own person. They can feel taken advantage of. Like the cow, I guess, is just always just the. It kind of seems to me like. Among other things, I think it's silly that like people are fine with killing and eating the cow, but like. Oh no, it's consent matters when like we don't have a problem with that part of the consent, but then this suddenly becomes a problem for meat eaters. But I don't know the cow. You're right; they are kind of like an infant in that way, right? On the intellectual ability, it does strike me though that it's something about the child becoming a person later on seems to matter. Yes, no.
In the paper that. The guy Levy wrote, he said that like a lot of like when like a child has sex with somebody older than them, oftentimes they don't the harm doesn't hit them then when they do it. It's like later when they grow up and they reflect on it, then they start to like be really harmed by it psychologically, and it like can really fuck them up. And so like, yeah, but I feel like with a cow, like, there isn't, because there isn't like higher order intelligence, right? You're not, the cow isn't going to like reflect on it and then like develop like an anxiety disorder, most likely, right?
And it's not,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good point.
there's something about like, it's not that it like kind of can't consent, right? It has things it enjoys and things it doesn't enjoy. And that's basically the extent to which it can make decisions. I don't feel like there was an article, there's somebody who was, I guess there was some duck that was like having sex with a lot of other ducks and at some particular pond, and it was sort of aggressive, and they're like, we have to intervene to stop duck rape. And I was like, I don't know if rape makes sense in the animal kingdom. Like as higher order things that can make decisions, who can decide on what we want for ourselves, and are in these like complex human relationships. There's ways in which I think we can consent and fail to consent to things in ways that lower animals can't. And rape is something that arises from is only like sensible at this higher level.
Yeah,
Yes.
so maybe that animals don't even have the ability to be raped because they don't have that understanding.
I'm tempted to say that, but I can also just picture an animal being like one dog like ripping, forcing itself on another dog who's trying to get away. So I mean, that certainly seems similar to rape, I guess. I mean, it kind of seems like they're not consenting, but
my question
that's
is,
why they mostly artificially inseminate dairy cows, is because like that one breed they use, the males are like a lot more aggressive than normal, and they like actively, they'll do a lot of like, they will like harm the female, so they artificially inseminate a lot because of that.
my question is, when it comes to things that are like natural, like for example, like maybe like a lion will like naturally like maul other animals,
right.
And I mean, maybe you think that it's okay for humans to kill animals, and maybe you don't think it's okay, but even if you don't think it's okay for us to kill animals, is it okay for animals to kill other animals?
I think it's like a child with a gun, right? It doesn't know what it's doing, right? But I would take the gun out of the kid's hand, and if there was a way to allow tigers to live their life without harming other animals, I think that would be nice. If I was God and I could snap my fingers and end the pain and suffering of the animal world and rearrange it so they're all herbivores, or like meat, there's like meat trees that the tigers can eat, I would do that. I think that would be a good thing for the world.
Wouldn't that be part of the nature of the tiger? Like, aren't you destroying the essence of what a tiger is by making them pseudo herbivores?
I mean, what do you think? I mean that's the sort of line you might want to take, is that it's natural, it's the natural order, but I'm not sure why the natural order is magically something you should preserve. It's just a random, not completely random, but an evolved, set of interactions. If it includes a lot of suffering, why preserve it?
Yeah, my question is, why is what's natural it always seems to be argued that's what's natural is the most correct thing. Like, for example, foods that'll be like, oh, it's natural, it's just how nature intended it. It's like, well, what makes nature so great? Like, even in the orangutan example, when she said like it's natural, like I understood why, but at the same time, I don't think just because it's in nature makes it correct. Like, if anything, I feel like we should kind of fight evolutionary urges to a certain extent.
I wholeheartedly agree. I see David nodding too.
Yeah, I also agree. And like I remember there's this like one GMO, because we have this discussion a lot with like GMOs and so on. And like there was this tomato, I don't remember what it was called, but it was just
Flavor
like one of the first GMO foods. And it was like this tomato that like would stay ripe after being picked, I think, for much longer, because like what happens right now is they pick them when they're like green, and then they like ship them over and then like artificially make them ripe, and they taste really awful. And so they had this tomato that like didn't go bad that fast, and so you could harvest it when it was actually ripe and ship it over, and then it would be in the grocery store and it would taste like 5 times better. And then I mean, so like if the only thing that's like different about it is it's just like one chemical is like turned on or off, right? I mean, then the more unquote unnatural one is better.
Exactly. Like the same thing with like yellow rice in countries, they would put the nutrient you needed. Or like all of Florida's orange industry would be completely dead right now if they hadn't created an orange plant that was resistant to like whatever bug was going around. Same with like pineapples. Like we just wouldn't have them anymore. Oh, that's one thing I also don't understand, why people who are super like it's all natural, like people who value that, why they're so upset about like animals going extinct. Like if that isn't the natural order of how like some animals come in and they come out, like then what's the big deal? If it's how nature intended it.
Yeah, I think appeals to nature are probably not good appeals to be making. I think utilitarians and Kantians can definitely make sense of that. Virtue ethicists might be able to make some sort of room for caring about the natural order. That's one of the things I think probably troubles me about virtue ethics, because like that seems like a bad appeal, and the fact that the virtue ethicists might be able to make room for it is not a selling point for me. That seems like a bad thing. All right, let's talk about the height paper. So the other paper is for this week is it's about he gives these subjects different scenarios and they have their gut reaction, and their scenarios which are sort of designed to get them to give a certain gut reaction, where if you think it through, there doesn't seem to be any good reason for their gut reaction. And yet they persist in sticking to it. They invent reasons to try defending it. They try to offer arguments, and then sometimes they trail off because they realize the argument's not working. And often they're at the end, they're just like, they call this dumbfounding or moral dumbfounding, where you get to the point where you're like, I don't know, it's just wrong. I don't know why. So he has a couple cases. I was looking, it's at the end of the article. One is one of my favorite ones is, some of them are not moral cases. Some of them are just like, for example, this one, the sole task. I have a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper here. If you agree to sign it, I'll give you $2 for real. If you sign it, you can then rip it up the paper immediately and keep the pieces for yourself. So take a look at this and sign it, and I'll give you $2. And the contract says, I, blank, hereby sell my soul after death to blank for the sum of blank, signed, And at the very bottom, it says, note, this form is part of a psychology experiment. It is not legally binding contract in any way. And so people don't sign it. And they're like, well, why don't you sign it? Like, it literally says it's void. And they're like, I don't know. I just don't want to, So I think that's not a really interesting one. But the interesting one is the incest case and the cannibalism case, where they try to give a scenario where there really shouldn't be any problem with it. And yet people are like, ew, gross. No, that's immoral. Totally wrong. Somebody should stop them. And then you're like, well, why? And then, well, in the incest case, I forget what Julie and Mark, who are brother and sister, are traveling together in Europe. They both are on a summer vacation from college. One night they are staying alone in a cabin near the beach. They decide that it would be interesting and fun if they tried making love. At least it would be a new experience for each of them. Julie was already taking birth control, but Mark uses a condom too, just to be safe. They both enjoy it, but they decide not to do it again. They keep that night as a special secret between them, which makes them feel even closer to each other. So what do you think about this? Was it wrong for them to have sex?
I was, what I was really curious about is whether, Sophie and Fife, would you sign the soul contract? I feel like I wouldn't.
I can feel the same. I can feel the same pull. Like,
yeah. And then, like with the cannibalism case, actually, I do have to say, I kind of feel like thinking about like Thomas Nagel's death, right? Right. I mean, the person's dead, right? And the researcher's taking the dead person's flesh, and they're about to be like, the corpse is going to be burned, right?
Right.
So I mean, it feels like it maybe doesn't harm anyone, but at the same time, like, then you could also say that, like, well, if you cheat on somebody and they don't find out, it doesn't harm them. I kind of feel like I feel like if they didn't consent to having their like body eaten, that maybe it does harm them.
I think you're right that this case is not perfectly written. They should probably make it so that, I don't know, my buddy and me are really interested in what human meat tastes like. So we make a pact that when we die, the other guy, before he reports the body, takes a piece and cooks it and eats it. Like, that seems like a non-morally problematic version of cannibalism where no one's harmed, but also there's no like consent issue like there seems to be with this one. I think that they didn't quite get this one right.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
yeah, their overall point though is this claim that normal people's moral reasoning is not that they have moral principles, which then they reason to answers. Instead, they just have gut reactions to cases, and then they invent justifications and reasons after the fact. So we're really just the claim is we're being pushed around by our emotions and our like whatever evolved or socialized or enculturated gut reactions we have, and we just pretend like we act from reasons. Really, we're just inventing them to explain to ourselves our gut reaction and make it sound justified when it's not.
I mean, I definitely think that's true. But like, for example, like people will like scream and jump across the room if they see a spider. It's like, it's just a spider.
Right.
And then I think it's interesting how different cultures can have different gut reactions to certain things. Like, for example, the cannibalism. After that day in class, I spent way too much time looking up what cultures eat their dead. And that was a fun time. But yeah, they're like these Indian like mystics who like eat like, yeah, it was weird. But well, it was my gut reaction that it was weird. So what makes one reaction better than the other? And my question is, should we rely on the gut reactions or would it be better to reason?
I mean, I think his point is that when you think you're reasoning, you're actually not. You're still just justifying your gut reactions. He's trying to say, like, I mean, he's trying to say you can't escape this, I guess, is what he's trying to claim. That would be I think he's pushing a really skeptical line towards morality in general. He's like, we're kind of fucked. This is all we're doing is chasing justifications for our emotions. I think that I'll take a skeptical line towards normal people and common sense and like what we do. But I think we can do something better in the philosophy classes, like when we sit down and reason through things. I hope that when we talk about utilitarianism and Kantian ethics, we're not just trying to justify our emotions. I don't think that that's what we're doing.
And no, I kind of agree that maybe like philosophers can figure out how to actually be logical, even if like maybe our gut reactions aren't. Maybe we can overcome it.
I mean, we're sitting here talking right now about the incest story, saying there's nothing wrong with it, or the cannibalism story. There's something slightly wrong, but if we adjusted it, so like we're overcoming that gut reaction. I mean, I find cannibalism and incest gross. I mean, it's both of those things are inbuilt evolutionarily, right? Like eating humans often is unhealthy. There's a reason you don't want to be near dead bodies, and that's, I mean, you can overcome it. Like a society can overcome that natural impulse and like raise their kids to want to eat their dead. So like it's not like it's universal, and it's definitely something you can train out of somebody, but it's natural not to. I mean, one reason it's natural not to want to commit incest is because otherwise we would all, I mean, you're born next to your siblings, everybody would just be having sex with their siblings, and then we'd have a bunch of lines of defective, deformed kids. So we're inbuilt in us is a aversion to incest. I guess the way it supposedly works is it's really just anybody you kind of grow up around. So like your brother and your sister, when you become, they just never seem like sexual objects to you. Just like maybe your neighbor kid who you also grew up with, like your brain just treats anybody you grew up with as puts them in the non-sexual category. I mean, not always, but like that's the tendency. What did you learn about cannibalism, Sophia?
Apparently, as long as you burn it, it's considered pure, and that you're gaining their knowledge by consuming them. So that's how like the wisdom of the generations was passed on, is by consuming the dead. Oh yeah, so like if there was some like great philosopher and he was like, I want you to cook and burn and eat me, they would be all over that because he'd be like, you're like really like smart and like all knowing. Or like a great Buddha or something, that would be like really of interest. But yeah, it was like how you passed on the generational like wisdom and like tradition and all that.
Yeah, I mean, so do we think that there's like, I think a lot of people will say that like they'll have that gut reaction that it's wrong, but like why aren't you burying your dead instead of eating them? But obviously, utilitarians don't have any problem with it. Kantians don't have any problem with it. I don't think a virtue ethicist should, but who knows what a virtue ethicist says about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Also, just kind of maybe a little interesting is I'm reading the Odyssey right now for my mythology class, and
Hmm.
like there's so much focus on like whenever anyone like dies or anything, like you have to like bury the body and like have a feast and whatever. And like if somebody dies in war, like there's like a giant fight over like getting the body back. And then like if they can steal it and like drag it around everywhere, it's like worse than like killing someone to like disrespect their dead body to this culture.
Yeah, we got a little bit of trouble. I mean, not this is not me, but this is like the same kind of group I was with. They used to there was a an ambush on a fire base in Afghanistan, and in Islamic cultures they don't burn their dead, they don't cremate, they bury them. And I guess the Taliban left their fighters. They didn't like come and get the bodies, so they got on the loudspeaker and they're like, "Come and get your bodies, Taliban! Otherwise, we're gonna burn them." And then they like set them on fire and taunted them. I mean, the reason for doing that is because if they're running around planting bombs, they can kill you all month long. But if you can trick them into getting into a shootout with you, you can tend to win those. But but that was a case of like people were very upset that the American soldiers were burning, cremating the remains of these enemy soldiers when their practice is to bury them. Obviously, like all these different cultures have different traditions, either eating the dead, burning the dead, burying the dead. It really seems like that's just driving on the left side of the road or driving on the right side of the road. There's some way in which we show respect for people who died, and we pick a random way of doing it. And then if you don't do that, it is disrespectful in that society. Like it's like if I don't shake your hand upon meeting you, or I mean, it's a little weird now because we're in this pandemic. But once we set the convention, the societal convention, that is the way you show respect. So there might be reason to do it to show respect once the convention is set, but any convention is fine. And you can always get out of a convention by just making an agreement. Like, I know it's not normal, but in our society, I want you to burn my body or something like that, and be like, okay, well, we shouldn't feel trapped by social conventions in the way that maybe we are trapped by moral restriction. I mean, I don't know if I see the prohibitions on against rape as a trapping me, but it is something I have to uphold. Whereas social conventions, we should be able to break those whenever, I don't know, whatever circumstance, whenever they get annoying.
Yeah, just whenever we don't feel like it. I mean, I think you have to have some degree of monogamy in terms of these sorts of traditions. Like, you can't be so different because then your culture isn't going to be unified.
Yeah, I mean, in order to have a shared, you're right. It's like you can't. These do seem like they serve a social conventions seem like they do serve an important unifying purpose, right? I feel like breaking a social convention is kind of like speeding. It's like, yeah, you can do it a little. Like we all need to kind of go the same speed. And if you're always speeding, like if you're just shooting down the freeway at 80 miles per hour, you're gonna get us in trouble. But like, just try to generally keep it around this. And if you have an emergency or something you really need to get to, okay, fine. And then you get a slap on the wrist, but that's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like the psychological speed limit. Like when I was with a driving instructor, she was saying like make sure during the test you really watch your dial because we have a tendency to kind of go around what everyone else is doing, and that can be like 20 miles higher than the speed limit.
Uh-huh.
But as long as the convention is we're all kind of going the same, like it's only when people go drastically different speeds that we have an issue.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's like when there's too much difference is the issue. It's not really what we're doing. Like if like in NASCAR races, everyone's driving over 100 miles per hour. And like it would be less safe if someone rode out driving 50 than if they all kept doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean like some conventions, like the convention to drive on the right side of the road, like obviously I mean it's arbitrary, but it's very important that everybody follows that convention all the time, once we've chosen one or the other. Whereas there's other conventions like how you're buried that maybe don't you can just kind of break just because you feel like it.
Can I ask? So let me play devil's advocate for a second. Pretend I'm not in this class. I'm just a friend of yours, and they're like, "Wait, so your ethics teacher told you incest and cannibalism like that? What is going on in your college classroom?" Do we think like what do we think of like or I mean like the way in which like I think we learn these, we start thinking about, well, what is morality really about? And if we think it's like maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering or respecting people's choices, then all of these other things that get treated more like we get raised to think of as moral matters a lot of them turn out not to be. And I feel like people can get upset about that. They're like, well, no, any sort of moral system that doesn't tell me that Julie and Mark are bad for having incest is that means that there's some evil moral system that he's trying to trick you into. Thoughts on that? No? You're not interested in responding to that person at all?
Well, I mean, I feel like I would basically do what like the moral dumbfounding researchers did, right? Like, I feel like you just try to say, well, like, there's nothing it doesn't violate anybody's choices, right? Everybody's consented to it. It's mutually derived pleasure, right? Like there's nothing actually like wrong seems to be happening. Nobody's being violated, right? And then I would also say like, there's plenty of cultures where it does happen, and obviously people don't want to be insensitive to other cultures. So I mean, that gets a lot of people sometimes. But yeah, I mean, just overall, like you can say that like it's possible to find something gross, but it's still like all right. And I mean, what people really don't like when I do this, but like I compare it to like homosexuality or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I say, 50 years ago that was considered wrong, very wrong. And then like also like I mean, we used to think that sex had to be one man, one woman. It had to be PIV sex. It had to be in marriage, and it had to be for procreation.
Wait, PV. Wait, I'm sorry.
He's naming the genitalia.
Oh, okay.
Penis and vagina, which is PIV,
okay. Yeah.
Sex. So we used to think that like, or when I say we, I mean like,
yeah,
society, maybe not philosophers, used to feel that sex had to be this and this and this. But like, when you really think about it, it doesn't really make sense. And then it's like, well, why not just like let everybody do what they want to do as long as there's informed consent?
Yeah. I mean, I think the same. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and for the most part, like people just don't really have an argument for it. It's like then they just get morally dumbfounded.
I mean, I think what they'll say incest is unnatural, eating humans is unnatural, being gay is. I mean, it's going to come back to that move. It's either it's like it's just wrong, I just know it, or some sort of appeal to what's natural, which I think is often probably what's counted as natural is just whatever I feel. Like it's just like an easy way to try and make it like to justify your gut reaction without having to explain. I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, to some extent, if incest happens, it's natural. We're all natural like whatever we do, we're creatures of nature, right? It's by definition, whatever I do is natural, is a product of nature. It's not clear. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, but like, yeah, I mean, like like you said, what's natural changes over time. We used to consider things unnatural that now seem fine to us, and so on. And like as time goes on, that just kind of shifts around wherever. And so I would try to convince people to like have more perspective on themselves, right? And like realize that, like if there isn't really a good reason for something to be wrong, then maybe in 50 years or whatever, it will seem perfectly natural.
Sophia, you want to take us out with a final thought?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think you should just challenge yourself to think a little more critically, and I think that's just really what we're trying to do. And sometimes it seems to have funny consequences, like incest isn't really that bad if you think about it, but here we are.
I would be happy if no one ever made an appeal to nature ever again.
Yes.
And we had to explain things in terms of consent and effects on people's welfare. And no one ever tried to convince me that something was right or wrong because it was quote unquote natural. But okay, great. Thanks for coming. And I'll post this for my